Thank you all for returning for the second segment of our sixth episode regarding the purpose of assessments and the important role they play in supporting our districts. Don't forget, if you like what you hear and want to learn more about other topics within the realm of education, then subscribe below or tune in every Thursday at 7 p.m. All right, Maria, take it away.
So, Abram, you left us thinking about wanting more info. I know I do, because this is, we talk about significant impact or statistically significant. So can you talk a little bit more about what we were just looking here between reading and math?
Yeah, Dr. Armstrong, you're right. This kind of macro level information requires further inquiry and investigation. And in my mind, there's a few more pieces of data that we would want to be able to engage with. And one of those is, what does this information actually look like?
Yes, by grade.
Right. So if the other chart kind of was flipped, right, where the higher percentage represents more students 2 or low grade levels below, excuse me, this kind of gives us some perspective into that macro level information. If we think about math and such formative years, the early grades obviously play a very important role.
Mm-hmm.
And what's concerning here is that for students that tested in school, we actually see the highest level of decline in student performance at the second and third grade level. But the reality is, Dr. Armstrong, that we see it across the board.
Yeah.
Just the magnitude and severity is a little different, right? And if we go back to kind of how some of the national narrative around student performance in the fall, I think, again, we've got to really investigate our data and dig deeper into some of the essential questions that help guide policy, that help guide central office supports and resource allocation, and potentially rethinking some of our strategies for remote learning.
Yep.
Let me also represent this information for reading. You note that, very similar to math, that kind of those formative years and the lower grades in K through 3, we see an impact here. And, the greatest impact has shown that in the second and third grade, the percentage of students that are falling into those 2 or more grade levels below is happening there, right? And, we know that amongst various states, there are initiatives that are driving towards getting every child as an active reader in the third grade, right? And this information will help us, right, highlight some practices and focus our attention to potentially some things that we need to reconsider.
No, we're so fortunate to have a platform to have discussions like this. And, we've got various networks within ALAS that are really looking at some of the long-term issues. And, I get teased a lot because I use the phrase, we need to focus on cracking that third grade literacy nut. Many of us have championed our entire careers around that, and we haven't been able to make a dent. So this is, we've got to do something with this data. And I'll tell you, by looking at grade level, it only spurs my curiosity. Now I want to know, what about our kids of color? Or, even there's all kinds of questions in my head right now, Abram.
Well, first, I just want to, give a huge shout out to our research team who's worked behind the scenes to elevate these findings and, give us the opportunity to just share. And as trusted partners with districts across the country, I feel that it's our obligation to share these findings and to share these insights. And we do, right? We have strong teams that support districts, and as vested partners, we do share that local information. But again, wanting to surface this up to the national level, I think it's you, Alas, and NASB have provided such an amazing platform for that.
Well, we appreciate it, that's for sure. Can we talk more data?
Yeah. Dr. Armstrong, you teed me up actually really well because, beyond grade level, I think, we've been folks really championing the work to advance equity for our underserved, traditionally marginalized communities, kids of color and kids of poverty. And the information that I want to present here goes a little deeper into that context as well. Are we okay to go into that?
Excellent.
Okay. So I'm kind of flipping bar graphs on you, and I apologize because it's like,
That's okay.
Wait a minute.
It keeps my attention. That's good. That's just good teaching.
Is the data going up or is the data going down? Which way are you going to go, right? So this information now starts to get into race and ethnicity. And here it's that same type of information for in school and how are students, specifically Black students in school, doing by reading. And similar to the matching of school data based on where students tested this year, our research team was able to parse out schools based on their student population. So the far left are students that have less than 25% Black, kind of the middle between 25 and 50, and the far right for schools that have more than 50% Black. I mean, I think the interesting thing here is probably something that we all are very well aware of, right? Wherever we have a larger concentration, performance is different, right? And in this case, we see the differences. And in fact, our fall performance actually shows a drop across the board, right? Which is concerning as well. And again, an important consideration as we're thinking about our remote strategy for the new year and any sort of shifts and changes that we may want to make.
Yeah, what strikes me as interesting too is for the 25 to 50%, it's almost, I equate it to, in a simplistic form, it's almost that transitioning phenomenon that we see oftentimes when a demographic starts to change. And so for that jump, because we go from 2 to 4 to 2. So when people, when there's a shift in that demographic change, as there is there, 25 to 50 versus less than 25, I don't know, it just begs that question about even just with the shift and transition piece.
Well, I mean, the inquiry that I think you're jumping into is like such a healthy exercise that I know school districts are doing, right? It's one question leads into 5 more questions, which lead into 5 more questions, and we're always trying to make sense of each of these different pieces. And here we have a really unique opportunity to kind of gain some insights or a window into data at a national level that absolutely demands further investigation. So let me transition from percentage of Black students in schools in reading to Latino students in school and in reading. And so very similar to the previous chart, here it's the same kind of breakdown, 25, 25, 50, and more than 50. And sadly, we see the starting point of where students are based on just concentration is much lower. And across the board, we just see Let's go to math.
Oh my!
When we talked kind of a little earlier in the vodcast, we mentioned kind of just nationally how this is being impacted, but we see it more in math for Black and Latino students. right? And you see those drops here. And significant as well.
Ooh, you're telling me.
Yeah. And let me also just then bring in another variable, which is kind of poverty or socioeconomic status,
Mm.
right? So much like the concentration shows in the other, we see the percentage of students that are placing 2 or more grade levels based on socioeconomics, we see drops. Let me show that also for math. So I'll pause there, Maria, because I think there's some pretty heavy slides there with some pretty important information.
Yeah, it is, we grapple with the data that we can say, you know what, this is not new data, but in fact it is. Yes, we've been falling behind, but now it's compounded. It's just, it takes it to a whole other level of discussion. And so to just sit back and say, what does that relate to? And I'll just tell you how it relates to me on a personal level. I've got a granddaughter who's a sophomore, and her school has been on since school started. So, but they have one day off in the middle of the week so they could do deep cleaning and that. Well, that has now turned into, remember how we used to talk about Fridays are quiz days, right? Test days on Fridays. Remember those days? And so, we grew up in those days, right? But luckily we moved away from that. But what I'm finding is, she's a sophomore in high school, and she's given it all she's got. She plays sports, so she knows she has to keep up her grades and all that. But what she's finding is her frustration level kind of tipped maybe about September. So a good couple of months in, she's like, I'm just so over it. If we're online, we're online, But what's happened is now all the testing takes place on Wednesday. So she finds herself in a very precarious spot because everything, of course, is CAT, it's computer adaptive, or she takes it on there, and it doesn't have the functionality of being able to go back and correct something after she finds herself processing, oh my gosh, I forgot to put the minus sign, or whatever the case may be. And so it's frustrating for her, and does it really capture what she does know? And are we only using that? So, from a student level, having that conversation with her and how it's worrisome is a whole other issue in and of itself of the data that we see. So we know just in that, how much reliability do we find in these assessments? What are we using them for? And where do we go with that from here? Or just kind of, that's my knee-jerk response, because I get a little passionate about this, as you can see, because it's hit very close to home. And, even the kinder that just started school this year. And he calls it Zoom school. And I get to, have witness to that, and so that I can see how it's affecting kids. And these are just two that are close to home. And to see the data from across our nation, we have got to do something with this data. What do you see as curriculum associates, as a supporter out there, as with other supporters out there? Where do you see the conversation shifting now from just being diagnostic and assessing? What's the conversation like now?
Well, so a few things that kind of surfaced when you were speaking is, we have to go back to what's the purpose of assessing. And, if assessment does not drive towards instruction, then we have lost a tremendous opportunity to capture what we need for potential unfinished learning, right? I mean, that's one piece. But as you were speaking, also, I was thinking about the different hats that this conversation has to kind of address from a systems level leadership perspective, right? I call some interesting opportunities here to our attention. So imagine, Dr. Armstrong, if we were back in previous roles that we've served, and information has been presented in a way that is not parsed in the way that we've seen it. We may come to some different conclusions that would impact our overall organizational strategy for remote learning.
Yeah.
Right? I think that's one really important thing. So what that calls to our attention is it demands us to ask more questions.
Yeah.
Right? That's I think one thing. But if we're thinking about a building level leader, this information does definitely help us make any sort of shifts to our professional learning plan with our educators, right?
Absolutely.
And we're learning in real time. So
Absolutely.
the more insightful information we have to make those pivots and call out what those educator moves are, like this information is really important. And then the most important is teacher and student, right? And what I feel, and I think it's so important, is that, again, I'll go back to the importance of assessment to drive towards instruction, right? And the understanding of where every child is at and being able to address each child's unique needs calls about the need to have tools then to match the unfinished learning, right? With not only just the where a kid's at, what skills they need, but then also what kinds of instructional, intentional things are we putting in front of kids? How are we helping them reach grade level mastery? What kinds of supports are we giving to teachers to help meet the unique needs, right? What kind of curricular resources are we using in order to match students with important and very meeting the needs of grade level standards, while at the same time scaffolding where children are at and not compromising, right? That to me is really important. So I think, again, amazing opportunities.
Yeah, no, and that's the heavy lift, right? I mean, but we've got to take a break. Look at, I'm already again on the edge of my chair. So we're going to take a quick break, Abram, and we're going to come back and continue to have another bit of conversation about what do we see, I like using the term down the street and around the corner, so that we can have some actionable steps for folks, or at least so that we can prime them so that when they come to our conference, they have the questions good to go, because we're going to have an entire panel full of folks that are going to be able to help navigate all of this. So we'll be right back.
Hey there, and don't forget, if you like what you hear and want to gain some more insight into what school districts are facing now, then tune in every Thursday at 7 p.m. or subscribe below. We thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Have a great night.